Good morning and welcome to this morning's sharing. Thank you so much for tuning in. I would love to talk about why trauma awareness matters in yoga, in bodywork, in the work that we do. In my mind, now this is my humble opinion. Maybe you have already noticed how there's definitely a lot more talk about trauma. The whole summit's happening about trauma, a lot more training courses happening. And maybe you are even feeling, it's all a bit much. And that is absolutely fine. That's fair enough. And you might have also noticed that I talk a lot about trauma, a lot more about chronic pain. That is, in my mind, also very much related. And that is because I think it actually matters. It really matters. We can really contribute to breaking down some stigma around this, which I think is much needed in the kind of process of healing individual as well as collective trauma. And in yoga and with bodywork, we can really support individual and community healing. And it's maybe because you actually want to focus your work on that specifically, great. But actually, even with your general approach to your work, we can make that contribution, and that is also why I think it really matters. So I wanted to talk today a little bit about kind of my take on this, why it matters in our work. So for one, I kind of already just mentioned, is because we can actually support the healing process. And that actually will be a whole separate talk. But what I want to focus on a little bit more today is I think it really matters in terms of trauma awareness, because there is a possibility that we actually re-traumatize people who come to a session with us or to our yoga class. And so I'm not even really talking to kind of, that I think everybody needs to do trauma-informed work and do trauma healing. No, but I think there is a baseline responsibility in what we do with yoga and body work so that we can be inclusive, and that we can, by, with our awareness, obviously avoid re-traumatization, and in that way also support the wider healing process. And I think that is our baseline responsibility. It is, in my mind, not something that is optional. So here is why. Maybe I just start by talking a little bit about what trauma is. It's a spontaneous protection mechanism in our body, because the one and only thing that our body is interested in is survival and safety. So on a continued basis, on every split second of every single day of your life, there is a beautifully designed system inside of you that will assess the situation, is it safe or not safe, and then will have for the body appropriate response to keep safe or to be safer in order to have a greater chance of survival. That is bottom line, biologically, what the body is designed to do. And this is not a rational process. This happens in the reptilian old brain. It's a very effective tool for survival. And the body might respond with fight or flight or with freeze, as we've probably all heard of. And of course, sometimes the body is not able to actually live that out completely and express that fully. And then it might get stored and stuck in the body, which might then in turn create a trauma pattern in our body. It can be, a trauma response can be to absolutely anything that the body perceives as a threat. And a threat, that could be, obviously quite a big thing, and that will make sense. So there's like a big bear coming running at you, or there's an earthquake, or there is, something like that happening. But it's really a response to anything. It could be anything unfamiliar, anything the body doesn't understand, anything that is too much, too soon, too fast, also not enough. And so it can be really any number of things that might create this response in our bodies. And it is very individual. It will be different for every single person. So one person will have a car accident and never leave the house again to cross the street, and the next person will be behind the wheel driving again the next day. And so it very much depends on the accumulation of our life stories, of any trauma that might have been passed down from generations, from our personal life experiences, our level of resilience, our personal kind of construct and makeup. And we'll have a different level of ability to navigate a new challenge or an unfamiliar situation. But at whatever level the body is responding, it is only doing that in order to restore a sense of safety for that moment, for itself, for my body is deciding in any given situation, how can I restore a sense of safety when that is in any way challenged? It's not something that we choose, so that's very important. A trauma response overrides the rational brain, and therefore certain reactions or behavioral patterns that might have developed over time might seem to the outsider, or maybe even to the person themselves, as inappropriate or disproportionate, irrational, overcharged in some way. So any time that an old pain or a discomfort is triggered, the body will have this memory and respond in that way again. So that's why it might be overcharged or exaggerated or irrational, because in that moment in time that the body comes up with this response again, it's actually, there is no danger, there's no real threat looking at it from the outside, but the body remembers the situation, and that stored story, that stored pain, that stored trauma in the body is triggered, and so the body goes into the same response because it feels threatened in its safety fundamentally. So there's trauma is a very, very complex topic, of course, and I'm not going to do it any justice really here, and I'm on purpose going to keep it really at the basics, to maybe just have an appreciation. So these are three things that we could maybe think of when it comes to a traumatized person. This person feels like that they have no choice, because rationally the trauma response was overriding the rational brain, was taking away the choice, the ability to act, to turn a different direction. It was turning that off and giving a trauma response. So there is a loss of choice, or a sense of loss of choice, and a loss of agency, a loss of ability to take action, to imagine yourself in a situation, and to then base a rational decision on that. So there's a loss of choice, lack of choice. And the person, so that's one. The second is that the person might feel unable to escape that situation in a different way. And again, that's because your trauma response is overriding your rational brain. So they feel quite trapped. There was no other option, no other way to escape the situation, and that response that was at the original kind of moment is now stored in the body. And thirdly, this can very often lead to the person being quite disconnected to themselves as well as to others. So they are kind of almost falling out of tune, out of resonance, out of harmony with themselves as well as with their environment, not feeling safe and comfortable within the world that they live in. So there is a dissociation, a disconnect that might happen. So maybe we just think of those. There's more, but we could just think of those three things, because that's something that we could really honor and respect and appreciate in the way that we conduct our work and the way that we present our work, and where we can maybe show a little bit more responsibility. Because so maybe it's already a little bit clear. It's not all about this kind of capital T, big T trauma, like the big earthquake or violence or abuse. It could be an accumulation of lots of small T traumas, small events that over time has created a level of pattern and dysregulation in our system that will then have created this trauma pattern, this trauma response in our bodies. And when that is triggered, that often leads to things like anxiety or depression, shutting down, that kind of hopeless, helpless behavioral pattern. But also might lead to pain, chronic pain, other chronic conditions. Very often there's lots of great work happening now that really shows the relationship between trauma and pain and chronic conditions and depression and all of those conditions. So maybe we haven't considered that before, but I would think that most of us, being yoga teachers or body workers, are working with people who suffer from those conditions. So we need to do a little bit of study here and really understand how that very often links back to trauma. That would also be a separate talk. But what I really want to talk about, as much as there's so much to talk about how we can support the healing process, and being always delighted to see more and more people focusing their work on that, we can really have a look at our responsibilities to not re-trigger, re-traumatize the person coming to us. And I see quite a lot of things happening that make me feel, make me cringe a little bit. And so, yeah, I don't know, I'm on a little bit of a mini mission of how can I make a contribution to change that a little bit on a wider picture. So more and more people suffering from anxiety and depression, pain, chronic conditions turn to body-mind practices now, which is great. So body-mind practices for sure has sort of moved to a certain kind of status, repetition, recognition is maybe the right word, that people suffering from those conditions actually seek that out. But the thing is that I feel there is, due to just a lack of understanding and awareness on this topic, because it wasn't always part of our training. So it's not your fault. It's not even the trainer's fault as much as, there is something that just needs to change in the system. That maybe your normal class, or the way that you're setting up your business, or the environment that a treatment takes place in, or just the way that we conduct the work is not always acknowledging trauma that our clients and students might actually be suffering from. And then there's also the just outright wrong approach to yoga and to massages and to that business, which I don't even want to talk about. That just makes me angry. But there are basics to consider, and here is a little list of things that we could start with, and maybe you'll go, actually, maybe I could have a little look at that or that, because they are actually small adjustments that we can make, and they will make a world of a difference already. And you'll realize that some of that will just be the way right now because maybe you just hadn't really considered it, or you didn't even realize or didn't notice there's so much that we do habitually and just hadn't thought about what that might be like for a traumatized person. Because remember, it really has very little to do with our rational brain. And unless you have had that experience yourself, it's actually really difficult to comprehend and to understand what goes on for that person. So here's just a few things to get us started with. The main thing is safety. Remember, the body is going into trauma response because it fundamentally doesn't feel safe in a particular situation. Whatever is happening there is too much, too fast, too soon, not enough. So we have an opportunity in the way that we are conducting our business and our work to create a safe space and safety for that person. And we can, basically anything and everything that we kind of put in place, we should just have a little like, is this creating safety, or is this kind of triggering an unsafe, as a triggering unsafety? That's not a word, but you know what I mean. So it starts with the way that you're presenting your work, with your marketing materials and with your business model, which maybe you hadn't really thought about. But maybe the information that you provide about your services could be clearer. There could be more clarity about what happens in your class. I'm just going to go on yoga. Like, what level is the class? Is there music? Is there, what does the class consist of? So that when people come, they know exactly what's going to happen. There's a structure, there's a format. And they should feel reassured that you're not going to deviate from that. And that's important to them, because they need to take that extra step to actually go to the class. So they need to know that they are going maybe to a place that is not necessarily in their comfort place, but they're going to dig deep and go anyway. And actually, in that way, you can foster some agency for them. But then you need to kind of also keep your promise. So this is how long the class is. You really keep to the timings. You might specify a little bit about the facilities that people can expect if there is a changing area, how to get into the building, what to bring if you want them to bring their own water bottle, if they need to bring a mat or whatever it might be. But there's real clarity, but also what the class itself is, what the movement is like, what the components of the class might be. So especially if you're doing something that maybe not that everybody might expect from if it's titled yoga class, but you always play music or you have a dance element in it, then that would be really worth mentioning. Same with giving treatments. What do you expect in a treatment? It's fully clothed, it's on a futon, it takes this long, brings some extra time, don't eat beforehand, wear these kind of clothes, bring a pair of socks. There's so much that we can do. And then obviously also explaining where the work is coming from and what it's about. Make no promises that we should not make. In fact, I don't think we should make any, because we can't. I can't promise an outcome, and I really shouldn't. Don't make any guarantees in your language, in the way that you are putting the information across. And there are ways around that. There are ways of changing the language that can talk about the great success stories. That is fine, but it's other people's success stories maybe, or that you can speak from your personal experience, or whatever. But don't assume that the person coming to you will have this experience or this experience, because you mustn't make that assumption. It will be individual for everyone involved. Don't 7-step people. It goes in the line of not making any guarantees and promises. Any 7-step programs, these are like the 3 keys to blah enlightenment, or this, that, and the other. It might have been for you, and that's okay. And you can speak about 3 aspects of your work. You can speak about the 3 topics that you want to address. You want to speak about the 3 pillars of your work. Great. But it might be 10 steps for the next person, or 7 steps for another person. And so allow room for that. Don't 7-step people. There should be no traps in your marketing materials. Like, you can only get the true information when you sign up and sign your life away. There needs to be always consent to market to people. Really important. And yes, funnels can be effective, and but funnels can also be made with consent, and with real value, and useful content information for people, rather than it feeling like, oh my God, I literally just got completely trapped, and now bombarded with information that I wasn't really asking for. So there's a whole bunch of things that we can really consider in the way that we're doing our marketing and our business model. Then the physical space where we do our work. And I know a lot of that happens online now, and it also applies to the online space. I could do a separate talk on that, I guess, maybe. But let's just talk about the physical space. It's an open door policy, so be welcoming, but also know that the door is open for you to leave any time that you need to leave. Remember, the person who is traumatized often feels trapped and that they have no choices. So let them know that, they can leave anytime. And if they do, don't take it personally. It's not about you. The space, in my mind, should be neutral and open, a blank canvas with as little dogma in it as possible. And of course, we all have our own beliefs and our own taste and, all of that. And I appreciate wanting to also bring like a personal note into the space. And at the same time, maybe do consider what that does. Here at home, I have my Ganesha on my altar and everything else. And I love spaces with that as well. And that might just not be right for the next person. So maybe your studio or your therapy space can be really as neutral as possible. And it's always helpful for the space to be really organized and structured and clear, so people know where they can get changed, where they can leave their things, that they know their things are safe, where they're going to leave them, where to go, etc. A small note on, current regulations, depending on where you are, but with the distancing requirements, maybe in a yoga class, and if you're marking the yoga mat positions on the floor, something as silly and little as that, But that could be really triggering for somebody. We've all noticed that people often come in and choose the same spot in the yoga room, and they get completely thrown if you turn it all around and teach from the other side of the room. Or maybe you notice people coming in and really taking like the back row. That for them at that moment in time is their safe space and the only space that they can be to join the class. But now we're marking the floor and telling them where to go. So that will already feel quite challenging for some people. And I've marked the floor as well in my studio because the room is so small that I also need to consider that responsibility. But I'm aware that this might not be comfortable for some people. So I'm already kind of open to the fact that maybe I'll explain it, or I maybe point out that there's different spots you can choose from. Which area would you prefer? If the class is not full, I let people choose their own alignment. So the markings was actually really just for when the space was to be full. So there's ways of dealing with it and acknowledging the fact that I need to have this structured right now, but this is the reason why, and I hope that is okay for you. So there is a lot we can do in consideration of the space. Language. So this is also a big one, and that applies maybe a little bit more to teaching yoga, but also to maybe your promotional materials and the way that you speak with your clients too, who come for a treatment. It should be invitational. Talking about language, that could be a whole other talk. Oh my god, I like literally talking about this topic makes me realize how many different extra talks I could do on all of this. So I don't want to go into too much detail here, but language, invitational and without judgment. So when we're teaching yoga, a basic would be to try and avoid the word just, because there is nothing just about anything for many people. And that is a really difficult one. I still say it way too much. If we're giving options and modifications, to avoid making one version the better version ultimately, or the stronger or the more advanced, but actually trying to give options in a very neutral way by simply saying or. So you could place your hand on the floor, or you could place your elbow on the knee, rather than saying if you want to make this stronger or better or more advanced, or if you want to go a little bit deeper, or if you want to go a bit further, you can place your hand on the floor. Then you're already adding a value and a judgment to those options, and making it neutral just really opens up the invitation, and people can make their own choices, and we can foster choice again, so we can actually support people in their healing. Obviously being aware of certain language that just simply isn't appropriate. Also, anyway, I think that's another talk coming. I'll go into that more. And part of that is also permission, to explicitly ask permission, to energetically ask permission, especially when it comes to working with touch. Explicitly giving permission for the person to say no, and this is too much, to say if they don't like something. And I really go into that very, very clearly, and I ask people to use their words, so that if they wanted to make any other sound, that they can, and that it's really not about me, that they really, are very welcome and very invited to say if something doesn't feel okay. And that's not only if it's too strong or a little bit painful, but it could just be not okay on some other level that today they're not up for. Maybe they feel like they want to stay with it and experience and go into the experience and breathe through it. They're also very welcome. But if today is not the day for that, to just say at any time. And why not even check in with them throughout? How does that feel? Is that okay? Do you feel okay? So that the person throughout the treatment really gets reminded and knows they could say no. They could maybe ask for a slight adjustment or ask a question, during a yoga class maybe, so that they feel really looked after, and that they have the choice. And I've even, kind of suffered through a massage before. Like, for some reason, we feel like, it's supposed to hurt. I'm like, no, it's not supposed to hurt. That's nonsense. But for some reason, we feel like we shouldn't say anything, we shouldn't complain, that would be rude, or I have no idea why we wouldn't say something. And then you're lying there really suffering, and you feel how you're getting really triggered and stressed in your nervous system, starting to sweat. You're literally having a nervous system response, because it's so painful. And we have a choice. We have a choice, and that is really important. And to give people that choice explicitly, to explain that that is part of the deal, really important. They can leave. They can say no. And then, maybe you even want to go a step further and create a policy. It takes some work, some research. It takes it takes a lot of work to really fully understand that, to create policy, for exclusivity, for sustainability, for accessibility. But that could go a long way. I'm still working through that, writing that for the studio. Because it will require also looking at, privilege and many other things. And to find the right wording for it, the right language for it. And so that would be yet another talk. Oh gosh, I've got now material for so many new talks. But yeah, you might want to go that far and actually create policy. That might go a long way. I guess there's many more talks to come on the back of this. If there is any particular topic on that you would be really interested in to know more about from the healing perspective, as well as these kind of things that I just talked about, tell me. And so just because I think that could be another talk doesn't mean that that's what you would be interested in. So please comment, let me know. I always love to hear from you. If you have any specific questions on anything that I just said, please also, if you're catching this somewhere on Facebook because I shared it, I tend to do these talks on a relatively regular basis and also share some practices, so you can maybe jump over onto my Facebook page if you want to like that so you don't miss it. Or if you're catching this on YouTube, again, trying to put something new up every week at least. Sometimes I don't succeed, but anyway, feel free to subscribe if you want to be notified. Thank you so much for watching and for sharing your thoughts and your questions. As always, take care, have a wonderful week, and I'll see you soon. Thank you.